Hello and welcome back to the NWR Virtual Healthcare Conference. My name's Matt Wright. Next up, we have Wayne Patterson, the CEO and Managing Director of Anteris Technologies, listed under the ASX ticker AVR. Anteris Technologies is a structural heart company that delivers clinical, superior and durable solutions through better science and design. Before we hear from Wayne, a reminder that if anyone in the audience has a question, please feel free to type it in using the Q&A function within Zoom. I'll hand it over to Wayne. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it. Good morning, everybody. I can't see you, but I know you're out there. So as Matt said, I'm Wayne Patterson, the CEO of Anteris Technologies. I'm going to talk a little bit about our company today, of course, and the disease state in which we operate in. But of course, as you know, Anteris is an ASX listed company under the ticker of AVR. But what we've basically done here we're in the business of science, obviously, and medicine, and we've created a new class of product to treat a fatal disease. And that's obviously a very significant step in terms of product development. And it's predominantly driven by Australian inventions, which I'm obviously very proud of as an expat Australian. So we're competing in a US $10 billion market. That's the prediction by 2028 by most of the folks who do this stuff in New York. That's based roughly on a 15-20% penetration of the current patient base. So, you know, if penetrated correctly, this market would be significantly bigger based on patient numbers. But no matter how you turn it, 10 billion is a large number. We have clinical studies underway. We have patients who have this product inside of them and working. So we've been able to demonstrate clinical superiority to the current incumbents. Now, this market is only really made up of two players, by the way, and both have products out there that are around 20 years old in terms of their design, and very, very different to the product we brought to market. But we started life not in the space that I'm going to talk to you about at the moment, but in a very different space. We have an Australian invention, a material called ADAPT. Now, this is a material used in surgical repair. And it's a very important material because it turns out to be the same kind of material that these products are made from to treat aortic stenosis. Now, we are by no means a small startup in that regard. The material that we have in surgical repair is in fact the only material to show zero calcification in humans over 10 years published. We have a lot of published data sets on this material. This becomes important because the disease we're talking about, aortic stenosis, is in fact the disease of calcification. ADAPT therefore became a very important part of the story. We then pivoted that material and turned it into the second technology, which is called DurAVR. DurAVR is in fact the valve itself, the product that is used to treat this disease. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But we also then created the first biomimetic valve. All the other valves out there are bioprosthetic. There hasn't been a new valve design in 2 decades. So a new product style in 2 decades. This is significant because we obviously own the IP, but more importantly, biomimetic simply means that it mimics the native biology. We've created a product that in fact looks very similar to the part of your body, the part of the anatomy that is switching out in this disease. ADAPT has also been used in 35,000 patients globally, no major events, of course, and it is FDA approved. So that's a huge hurdle to get over if you're trying to enter this space. ADAPT would be in the top 1 or 2 materials in the world of this nature. We'd be in the top 1 or 2 companies in the world for producing this kind of material. The picture you see on the right is in fact one of our facilities in Perth. We have several up here in the US as well. The third technology is the delivery system itself. You see on the far right, that is the catheter that's designed to deliver this valve where it needs to go. Very important, even though you throw it away at the end of the procedure, it's not kept. This, to my knowledge and to the knowledge of the physicians that we work with, is in fact the first physician designed from the ground up kind of delivery system. When we started this journey, we assembled a team of tier 1 of the tier 1 TAVR physicians in the world. I mean, guys who do thousands of procedures amongst them. They're very well known on the podium and very well published, and basically put them in a room with the engineers to design a physician-led or a user-led device here, obviously giving them the features and benefits that they need. So when you put these 3 technologies together, you've got the material ADAPT, you've got the valve DurAVR, and the delivery system Commisure. You've got a very, very important medical product that's used for treating a very significant serious disease. Here are the timelines in brief. We started this journey in aortic stenosis roughly in 2020, give or take. So we have moved through very, very quickly. Obviously, there's a cost benefit in terms of time there. But certainly part of what's helped us is the physicians that we work with, as well as the clinical results we're getting. We move from concept to humans, from animals to humans quite quickly, and have recently just been approved by the FDA for a clinical study to add to the patients we've got. Very quickly about our team, I think it's a little bit of an unusual team by standards. I'm the CEO, as I mentioned. I've got 25 years in big pharma, a lot of drug launches around the world, amounting to billions behind me. Matt is our CFO based in Australia, a lot of years at KPMG, certainly an ASX and compliance expert. Chris is a physician, practicing physician, does literally hundreds of TAVRs himself, is well known on the podium, is well published as well, is also our chief medical officer, and certainly has helped the development process and speed a lot. And then David is our COO. David worked with me at Merck and has had a long career in global healthcare as well, with a lot of big product launches. So these are global guys who know their stuff globally. So let's talk about this disease a little bit. We've developed this first-in-class product to treat aortic stenosis. As I mentioned, it's a fatal disease in about 50% of patients if left untreated. Critically important is that there is no pharmacotherapy. There is no drug to treat this disease. You can't give a medication for it. You have to physically go in there and change out a piece of the anatomy, which is the valve, and switch it out for another piece. That's the only way to deal with the disease. But 1 in 8 people over 75 have aortic stenosis. I think the numbers are even a little bit bigger than that, who maybe are asymptomatic. Now, the way they treated this disease, as I said, there's no drug, so they have to change that valve. And in days gone by, and including today, they would go in and open up a patient's chest, take out the existing valve and put in a replacement valve. That's well and good, except for a lot of patients who are severe, are too sick to undergo that procedure. So they had basically no solutions, no drug, no solutions. Those were the patients that this kind of device was really designed for. And I'll come to that in a minute. But you can see in the middle, this is a disease of calcium I mentioned earlier. And what basically happens is there is a valve at the bottom of the aorta, as you can see in that diagram. That valve's job is to open and close to allow blood to go one way and to stop it coming back the other way, causing regurg. But as you can see in the diagram, as calcium builds up around that valve, that opening gets narrower and narrower, and the blood pressures get higher and higher until they're dangerous and even fatal, and cause a whole bunch of other systemic problems as well. So you have to treat the disease. Now, for the patients who couldn't have their chest cracked, who had no solution, a couple of companies came up with a very, very elegant solution, which was to put the valve onto a catheter. So rather than opening up a chest, this valve was delivered through the femoral artery down near your groin, driven up over the aorta, and the valve was put in place, and the aorta, the catheter was taken out and disposed of. There are limitations to this procedure. One of them is that the valve itself is not designed to be anatomically correct. It's not designed to look like the valve that it's replacing. And the reason was the principal problem they were solving here was treating patients whose chest you couldn't open up. So there were compromises in that valve design simply because they had to make it small enough to get on a catheter. So there were limitations in some of the design aspects. It didn't really matter, because the patients they were treating were a lot older and had maybe different requirements. But here's what's changing in the landscape dramatically. In 2021, 40% of patients were still getting surgical valves, which generally give a better outcome because you can get inside the patient, you can place the valve properly. That's a little bit more challenging with a catheter. But by 2028, as you can see, 87% of patients will be getting catheter-based valves, a TAVR valve. Now, that's cause for concern, because that means that patients who generally wouldn't have had this kind of procedure before, they would have got a surgical valve, are now getting a TAVR valve. And these TAVRs, the existing TAVRs, were not necessarily designed for the kind of patients we're treating today. That's driving the market growth. As I said, 10 billion by 2028. You can see why that movement and why this market is moving so quickly. But here's the real problem. The current TAVR designs are 20 years old, 2 decades. There's only a couple of them. And they were designed for the patient on the left. And obviously the patient outcome is really important. This is a patient who, I said earlier, you couldn't open their chest. They had no real option. There was no drug to give them. And so this was a great outcome. You could put a valve in there and you could basically keep that patient alive, even if the valve was compromised to some extent in the way it worked. What happened in 2019, however, is the FDA approved the use of TAVRs in these younger patients whose chest you could crack open. You could go in there surgically. And of course, you saw this major shift in younger patients getting these products. But these products were not necessarily designed for younger patients. They were designed for older patients. And what I mean by that is they have limitations on their blood flow. They have limitations on their durability. Now, you didn't really see it a whole lot. That patient who was 85 probably passed away in 2 to 3 years, and the valve was still probably functioning well enough. But in the younger patients, that's a different story. This patient is going to live a lot longer. So the existing products in the market were not imagined or designed to treat the patients that we're treating now, as you saw that shift in patient demographic. The patients today, the mean age is about 73, so it's come down from 85 to 73 in just a very short time. This patient has very, very different needs. This patient is going to live a lot longer, certainly, so the valve has to go longer. And these replacement valves do fail sometimes in 2 to 3 years. They fail pretty quickly, and they fail quicker in younger patients because the valve is working faster. They fail because they calcify. They fail because they mechanically wear out. But that's not the key issue. The key issue is actually the near term, where the patient is not getting normal blood flow. None of the valves in the market will take you back to the pre-disease blood flow. And this is the disease of symptoms. If you have severe aortic stenosis, you are short of breath. It limits your ability to not just exercise, but to move, to go shopping, to do simple tasks. And obviously being sedentary is not a good idea when you're already sick. You want to be able to move and get those people fit. So these patients have different requirements. The younger patient is playing with the grandkids, they're playing golf, they're playing tennis, they're doing all kinds of things where normal blood flow matters. So quality of life obviously becomes important, but that has a real clinical impact. And more importantly, they're going to live a lot longer. So they need valves that will last the distance of the patient. The current valves just don't do that. Now, if we look at the existing products, they did do a great job in the older patients, but they didn't deliver on 2 key aspects. One is pre-disease hemodynamics or blood flow. I mentioned that. These products, when you basically get off the table, do not take you out of aortic stenosis. You're still roughly in the range of mild stenosis. And over time, that valve will start to degrade. You'll end up in moderate and severe disease again. Then there's the long-term durability. I've seen in the last couple of years, more and more on the podium, particularly at these big medical congresses, physicians' #1 challenge is how to deal with a valve that's failed on the second time and how to get another valve inside of that one in a very sick patient, in a very bad kind of salvage environment. So this is testimony to the fact that younger patients are living longer. We're now, just in the last 3 or 4 years, seeing these patients now coming through that got those patients some 3 or 4 years ago as those were approved for younger patients. Now, the 3 core components I've mentioned, the tissue, ADAPT is the benchmark. We've done a lot of tests head-to-head. We've got a lot of patients out there. I don't think anyone argues the point that it is the best or amongst the best tissue treatments in the world. And I think it's the barrier to entry. You've got to be at least as good as ADAPT to even get into this market. It took about 20 years to develop ADAPT by a physician in Australia, so it's not an easy task. Then there's DurAVR. It's the first biomimetic valve in the world in this space. And then, of course, the delivery system. So you have to judge a TAVR on all 3 components to understand what's really happening. But the calcification stuff is really important. But this is really a story of the here and the now. The minute you get off the table, this valve is working better than in other products out there, which has clinical impact. And the longer term, of course, is important as well. The valve is designed to look like the valve in your body. By the way, your body, the one in your body is a single piece 3D valve. It looks like this. It opens a lot wider than the existing valve. So we've been able to take a different approach. The early valves were designed to go in a catheter. They had to make them smaller. And from an engineering point of view, we're able to step back and say, okay, that happens. There's no point us developing a product that looks like the ones that are already out there. We have to bring some benefits or don't bother. And the physicians and the engineers were able to do that. They developed a valve that mimicked the native anatomy. It works like a native valve. And then, of course, to develop a delivery system that could accommodate this valve. Just a couple of interesting things here, as you can see, that looking at a competitor valve, and this is a little bit technical, but it's nicely shown in this diagram here. The coaptation area is actually where these leaflets come together, called the coaptation zone. A normal valve looks like hands praying, and you'll see that on the DurAVR side, and it gives a long coaptation area, very important to the blood flow. The competitor valves, the 3-piece valves, of which they all are, have a much shorter coaptation zone. They tend to snap at the top, and it does restrict the blood flow. They get doming. You'll see on the left that when you see the DurAVR valve manufactured, it's a single piece, it's molded as well, it's shaped like a native valve. When you put it in situ, I've had physicians say to me, except for the frame which you see there, when they look at this valve in actual patients, it looks like a native valve, but for the frame. So a normal valve, I guess, does normal things. I look at it when you're changing out a part of the anatomy, which is what this disease treatment is all about. You really want to be changing it with something that looks like the anatomy in the first place. But let's talk about the patients. We've had 13 patients so far this year, so far in total. This year we'll finish with about 30 to 40 patients. That's a very big number to prove the point. Now we're getting different results and we understand why, but to just give you some perspective, this is a disease that's basically defined by mean gradient, that's a blood pressure measurement, and EOA, the opening of the valve. There are other markers, but these are the two critical ones. Now, normal mean gradient pre-disease should be 5 to 10 millimeters of mercury. And when you get to severe disease, it's going to be about 40, and up to 50 gets very sick. So you can see the baseline, these 13 patients were at 49, so 50, so all in the very severe range. And after 30 days, so obviously very short term, they came back down within the normal range. And we had some very sick patients here, patients that had small annulus, which is more difficult to treat. We had one patient who had a mean gradient of 90, 50 being very high. So 90 means you've got limited time to live, maybe a month, according to the physicians. That patient came down to about 9 millimeters within 30 days, which is incredible to get a normal result of somebody that sick. And after 1 year follow-up, they were at about 8.5 millimeters of mercury. So incredible results. The other defining measurement is the EOA. That's the opening area. So here you want obviously a bigger number. With blood pressure, you want a lower number, which you just saw. So the baseline is 0.5. A sick patient is going to be between 0.25 and 0.5. So that's a very narrow opening. These are small annulus patients, 22.95 mean. And after 30 days, they're all at 2. So that's an incredible result. It's a normal result, which you won't actually see with other products. One of the defining measurements is a standardized test called the 6-minute walk test. This is really important. We haven't seen a lot of this with the other products in terms of clinical studies. We like to use it because it shows not only is the product working, but the patient is getting better, because this is a really important aspect of recovery. You can see the baseline improvements over baseline to 1 year is about 32%. That is significant in medical terms. When you get an increase of 32% on anything, let alone exercise tolerance and ability to exercise, it is so critically important to that patient's recovery. But it speaks to a much more normalized lifestyle moving forward, and less debilitation. So critically important, but it really proves that the valve is working. I really like to look at this. This is fairly new data. It's across 22 patients, but it's never been seen before in this particular product area. Now, what you're looking at is a 2D MRI, looking at flow displacement and flow reversal. What I want to demonstrate here is that if you put in a valve that looks like a normal valve, you get normal results. And if you don't, then you don't get normal results. And I'll show you that. The valve on the left is a normal pre-disease untreated valve. So that's what healthy looks like. You'll all feel like physicians by the time you finish watching this, but you can see that orange flash. Basically, it shows good laminar flow. If you go to the right, you'll see the DurAVR valve, our valve, and you look at the numbers, there's no statistical difference between these. But you can see just looking at the imagery that the DurAVR valve is normal as well. Now, this has not been seen with a manufactured valve before. So it shows you how a normal valve will behave like a normal, a valve design like a human valve will behave in a normal way. If we go to the bottom left, you can see a severe stenotic valve that's not treated. And you can see a very compromised flow there. No surprises. What is surprising is you go across to the right or to the center, you'll see the two products that are currently in the market. On the left, the market leader, on the other side, the number 2 in the market. Both of these products have very compromised flow. But more importantly, the one on the left, which is market leader, has worse flow than a pre-treated disease valve. That's pretty startling. This is preliminary data. Of course, we are doing more studies on this. But it does speak to other clinical complications that do appear with TAVR patients that maybe were not fully understood. And we're articulating that science to make sure that we can have those discussions on the podium as a new product to the market and really demonstrate clinical superiority on every aspect. And we invite the other products out there to do the same and have those discussions as well. Now, the other thing I want to demonstrate here on the far right is a surgical valve. Again, it's not been seen where a TAVR valve will outperform a surgical valve, because surgical valves are always thought to be better because you place them by surgery, not by catheter. And what you see here is the DurAVR valve has actually got better flow than the surgical valve as well, which is the market-leading surgical valve. So across the board, the DurAVR valve behaves normally and the other valves do not. This does have significant impact on clinical outcomes, and we will demonstrate more of that. There's a lot going on here. I think the biomimetic valve as a construct, a new class of valve for the first time in 2 decades, is really an important breakthrough. An Australian invention has driven all of this, but it really does give you that restorative effect. And in these younger patients, this is really important. Now, this is a view of the 2 products in the market. They're left and right, and then our product in the middle. It is done on a bench, so it's a proxy, but just wanted to give you an indication visually of what these look like. This is what it basically looks like in the body. We can control the pressures in and out on this device. But you can see the DurAVR valve opens a lot wider than the others. On the left, you've got the market leader, and you'll see that compromise in that 3-piece valve design leads to a bit of doming at the top, and that does restrict the blood flow. On the far right, you've got the Evolute valve. It's actually the only one made from porcine. The other 2 are made from bovine. And I think back in the day, they made it from porcine because it was a little bit thinner, a little bit smaller, but they probably wouldn't do that now. And it does have impact, certainly on the blood flow. In every case we look at, whether it's humans, whether it's animals, or on the bench, DurAVR has superior near-term, short-term clinical performance, which translates to longer term. Now, the early feasibility study has been approved. It was we got preliminary approval in December. This is an FDA approval. After a good 12 to 18 months of studies, animal studies, material studies, there are a lot of things you have to, of course, prove to the FDA, fortunately, to prove that you're safe and fit for humans. They also reviewed our 13 patients. That helped a lot in the dossier. And we got full approval, unrestricted, in February. This study has also been given a Category B designation, which is to say that it's fully reimbursed, and we're just waiting for CMS, the body that approves that, that ratifies that, to come through. That does defray the costs of a study, both for this study and for the pivotal study. They're far lower costs than people might imagine because they're fully reimbursed. So that's a big step up. That means that your product is investigational, not experimental, of course. Ethics approvals are going through some of the biggest sites in the world for TAVR right now. They're really prestigious sites who have agreed to do this study, so we're very fortunate. A lot of them, of course, are our advisory doctors who have been on the ad board for 3 to 4 years. So that's all going through right now. We've had several approved, including Cleveland and Columbia. The site initiation visits are underway as we speak. But we anticipate all patients will be fully enrolled during May, June, and the 30-day follow-up completed by July. So very near term. This is a significant step. When you look at companies in medtech, they generally move into partnerships, acquisitions, or something else at the end of an EFS, because then when you've got that stage, for us, upwards of 30 plus patients. The data is already scheduled and has been accepted to be presented at TCT, which is a major conference in this space in Q3. So, of course, we're very excited for that. There is the protocol here. What's really great about this protocol is that we really got a fairly unrestricted patient group that we can study, native severe AS, but all surgical risk, low, medium, and high. So we're not really restricted in the kind of patients we can take on. The safety endpoints, of course, are fairly standard: all-cause mortality, disabling stroke, according to the VARC-3 criteria. And the technical success there is device success, including the hemodynamic performance, which we've already demonstrated, of course, in patients. The things that we've added to this study at our request, which really other companies tend not to look at, and we're happy to look at these things, is laminar flow. I just showed you the normal flow from our product. That is clinically important. Left ventricular remodeling, LV remodeling, this disease and permutations of this disease and other effects cause the left ventricle to expand quite a lot and become dysfunctional, leading to heart failure. And that's a result of back pressures and a whole bunch of things that are going on. We anticipate, as we have better flow, laminar flow, and reduced pressures, that there should be some degree of that ventricle remodeling, and that'll be huge. That's a big breakthrough if we can show remodeling or any improvement in the left ventricle. And of course, exercise hemodynamics. I showed you that a minute ago, but really important that a patient getting this product is able to perform better than before and has a good quality of life, and of course a higher longer longevity. Follow-up is 10 years. That doesn't, of course, mean we have to wait 10 years. We have to wait 30 days, but we want to follow these patients as long as we can, of course, to prove the point for both the short term and the longer term. So this study is all about short term. How do you look when you get off the table? And the longer term follow-up is there as well. Now, Pre-commercial and commercial rollout. I get a lot of questions about this, so I thought I'd add a slide on it. I've launched 36 products myself globally, billion-dollar products, as has David and people in our team. We've been following the pre-launch playbook for about 2 to 3 years now. There is a pre-launch process. It includes the kind of advisors you work with, how you ramp up a product, and whether you have clinical superiority. All of these things matter. If you've done it a lot globally, then of course it's not a mystery. If you haven't, it might seem a little bit like a daunting task from the outside. It truly is not. And not necessarily an expensive task in this particular space. We anticipate in the first year 5% market share. That's hyper conservative. That would equate to somewhere in the range of 250 to 300 million US dollars. We have a lot lower infrastructure costs than the bigger companies, of course, so we would be cash flow positive relatively quickly on that basis once we got through the inventory costs. But we do have clinical superiority. We know why we have that, and we anticipate that to continue, of course. TAVR procedures are concentrated in high volume centers, so it's not like you have to launch the universe on one day. 65% of the volume comes from the top 20% of centers in the States here. And we're well covered in that group by our medical advisory board, the physicians we work with right now, and the physicians within their network, and people that we also know as well who don't necessarily sit on our ad board. So we are certainly in good hands. Many of the physicians we talk to and who know this product will tell you that they will use it for 50% or even 100% of patients from day one. In aortic stenosis and valve, which I won't really talk about today. Regulatory approval, the clinical trials, again, I get a lot of questions around this, but because this is a category B study, the clinical trial costs are reimbursed. Doesn't fully cover us, but they're not exceptional costs. These costs are not dramatic. The cost of commercialization actually, and the cost of the regulatory study for commercial approval is well within our capital management strategy and well within our means to raise that capital. It's not a huge number. But in terms of share, I mean, 5% share is 50% usage in the top 10 centers. It's not a big undertaking. We wouldn't need a single rep to start that process because we already know these folks, or 25% across the top 35. When you start to look at these numbers, you can see that they're quite achievable. The US facilities are also up and running now. We have manufacturing up here. You can see these pictures here in our lab. All of those machines are used to test valves, make sure they're safe for patients. On the far right, these ladies here are manufacturing and testing valves that are being done here in the States for these clinical trials. A lot of big partnerships. I can see, Matt, you're wanting me to get to the end here. I won't go through the partnerships. They're very prestigious. And of course, they speak and validate the science that we're working on. Final point, it's a new class of valve. It's a new product that treats a fatal disease. It's the only product that really gives you a preclinical, pre-disease state in terms of blood flow. But these three components of the tissue adapt, the valve design, DurAVR, and the delivery system, Comissure, really make for a product that has both clinical superiority, so great outcomes for patients, but obviously also points to the commercial success and viability of this product. So on that note, I'll put a pause in it and go to questions, Matt.
No worries. Thanks, Wayne. That's very comprehensive. We're getting close to time, so we'll just go a few quick fire questions to finish off because I do want to get through them. So the first one is, how many patients do you expect to enroll in your pivotal trial?
Right. So, I mean, the key point here is, you know, the FDA, we've been given access to the FDA on a monthly basis. Just recently, they reached out and said they'd like to have informal meetings. That's a huge step. You don't get that as a small company, so it speaks to their confidence in us. Look, it could be 1,000 patients, which of course is a very small study. I've run studies of 10,000. So for me, that's a small study. It could be as low as 500 even. It's hard to say. I think at the upper range is going to be 1,000 to 1,100, something like that. Either way, the physicians say they can enroll that study within a year, whether it's 500 or 1,000. They're certainly the volume of patients out there would well and truly cover it. So it doesn't really have a material difference. But let's say 1,000 at the worst case scenario.
Great. And how is recruitment going for the FDA EFS for the product?
Yeah, so the recruitment phase, we go through, as I demonstrated, the IRB, the ethics approval. So there's a stepwise approach even after you get the FDA approval. Those things are all going through. Some of the hospitals, such as Cleveland and Columbia, have actually approved the IRB, so that's good. They're going through patient selection right now. So once they select out the patients they want, that's in essence the recruitment. Those patients will be then scheduled and implanted during May and June, with the whole study completed by the end of June and the 30-day follow-up completed by the end of July.
Great. And given the Category B designation for DurAVR, in the FDA trials and its ability to be sold during the trial, what price can each device be sold for?
Right, so there's two components to category B. One is the cost of the device, one is the cost of procedure. So the cost of procedure covers our costs, of course, that's important. Cost of device is circa US 25,000. So it's significant. Certainly I can't tell you the cost of goods, but understand that that margin is pretty good. Obviously that's not gonna be the commercial story, but we will actually start to book, let's say, income during the course of that study. In fact, this year as well. So during the course of 23, 24, 25, we'll be booking income from those studies.
Great, and you've touched on it there, but the $64,000 question, I guess, that a couple of people have come in with is, when can you expect to start earning revenues?
Well, I mean, yes. So if you define revenues as commercial launch, that's one question. Obviously, revenues and income around the studies is another question. So I'll discount the studies for the minute. We have multiple paths, a couple of which I'm not privy to talk about right now, that we're discussing with the FDA. Some of them are quicker, some of them are longer. And we certainly are looking at valve-in-valve, which could be our first commercial launch. That's a huge unmet medical need. 20-30% of patients are $2 or $3 billion worth, where our product is absolutely no-brainer, the best product for that function. We may have more news on that by the AGM. That could bring us to revenues and income in 24, 25. And beyond that, the aortic stenosis, which is obviously the big ticket item, revenues, I would anticipate, starting around about 26, somewhere in that range.
Great. Really appreciate you taking the time to go through the story today, Wayne.
Fantastic. Thanks for having me, Matt. Really appreciate it.
No problem. Next up, we have Microbial Life Sciences, who will be on at 10:20 Eastern Time. But thanks again to everyone for joining, and thanks, Wayne.
Thanks, Matt.